several reasons. One, it's like just the ratios generally can stay better. You have the kids have more familiarity with everyone in the school versus masses of people. And then also, I think when you get all consolidation, you've got more traffic, there's going to definitely quality of life for everyone moving around, trying to get to the school and stuff like that. Whereas when it's more localized with more schools. So, but I've heard concerns with Chamberlain being where it's at, and so that's the bottom line where I'm at.
So do you have concerns about the city center piece here with the school here as well? I'm just as city center develops, which I think it sounds like is inevitable. Hi, Helen. Come join us. Yes, absolutely. This is, for those of you that don't know, this is Helen Riley. She's the chair of the city council.
I can all stand up here.
Yeah.
And she had a late night last night.
I did.
Yeah, why? Because it's with the State House. Yeah.
So we're done.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, we're done.
So we're just talking about the scenarios and preferences. So city center concerns.
Right, because that'll definitely affect Marcotte and what happens there. So I actually haven't seen, I don't recall exact plans of when, like there isn't a time frame for that, is there? Yeah.
I'm deferring to my city council people
Time
on that.
frame for what?
For the development of city center.
Yeah.
Well, there is. We need to get as much built as soon as we can to capitalize on the tax incremental financing piece. How that works is as things are built, the taxes that normally would go to the state to support, education and all sorts of things stay in the city, but the building has to be constructed. And you have a 10-year time frame. So if you do everything the last 2 years, the tax benefit is pretty modest. So what you want to do is have the tax benefits begin as soon as possible. And they begin when we do bonding. The community votes to do bonding for some of the infrastructure.
Can you tell the kind of things that are planned already, Helen, in
Well,
terms
a lot
of
of
city center?
I mean, there's housing that you probably noticed on Market Street. How many units is it?
It's
15
like
or 16
30. No, wait. Oh, you mean the ones down at Market? At the
Yeah,
end there,
yeah,
down-
yeah. Yeah, at the end of this street,
Right,
yeah.
yeah. Those are
I can't remember.
4 triplexes, I think, or 4 quadplexes, but they're
Yeah.
apartments, yeah.
So that's a piece. So that's housing. I think they're imagining a fair amount of housing in the downtown area. They're 4 or 5 stories, so it's very urban looking. The bottom floors need to be businesses, small businesses, but then the upper floors can be anything they want. And the developers to date have pretty much said it's housing that's gonna fly.
That's where the money is.
Yeah, in fact, those duplex, whatever the housing that's almost ready, they're already fully rented or sold or whatever,
Rented,
leased.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's going to be a lot of housing,
Yeah.
but with some small businesses. So it.
And there is a development that's in the initial stages for right here. It's 2 blocks of 4-story senior housing.
Yeah.
So it's right on the curve across from the old venue restaurant. Show, whatever it was.
So right out the driveway.
Right, yeah.
Right.
When you went up the driveway, turn right immediately. That grove of birch trees
Yeah.
turned into a 4-story building.
But the bottom story is businesses.
Commercial, yeah.
Some, I think there might even be doctor's offices and things that kind of are potentially compatible with senior housing.
Is there any green space planned?
Oh yeah, I think there's the hope for green space. Dumont Park will be, there's a really beautiful plan for revitalizing that, and in fact will be, I believe the city council will put on the ballot for November bonding for Dumont Park and Market Street and some of that infrastructure. But so I mean it could be a really nice area for a school if it's a lot of housing and small businesses and there's a big pedestrian piece, there's a bike path and,
Because it
it's
would
just
make
2
it more
lanes.
developed
of-
area, so there's easily walkable for kids getting to school.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And it
So-
is, the city center is this area, right?
Yeah, so we're
Market
hoping to
Street.
include the U Mall. That has been added as part of what they call city town center or something. town
Mr. Burke
center.
pulled up the video that Doran Whittier did of the,
So this is, not, not to imply that all of these things you're gonna see are in the works. But this is kind of what's allowable under form-based code, and form-based code means that the building, the type of building is what's governed. I just learned this, by the way, last year. But the use of that is in play. So the upstairs, as Helen said, could be residential, could also be offices, could be whatever.
Sort of the setup like in Five Corners in Essex.
yes,
where they-
there's some similarities there, right?
Yeah, there are, yeah. Except we're
Kind
been
of.
told that most of it's gonna be housing.
Okay.
Downstairs will be
business or office.
businesses or
Restaurants,
offices.
cafes.
That's kind of
whatever.
market,
Cafes, that kind of thing.
So you'll see on this animation. So, and I'll try to do the best I can to.
Do you want to,
I've
have you seen it?
I've seen it too.
Oh, okay, I didn't.
It's one next to the
I'll just let this run.
This is an imaginary flyover, right? So
Yeah.
none of
Correct.
this is permitted at this point, or not permitted,
Right.
but there are
It's
no
an
permits
idea,
for this, or
yeah.
applications for permits. It's just a,
And I'm not,
it's an illustration.
my kids don't go to school here.
Right.
However, I know like my son was preschool, they took a trip to Uno's, which was right there, and they like made pizza. So I think there's like a lot of opportunities that could be available for the school having
Absolutely.
Definitely.
stuff around.
So if you see, this is Dorset Street, right? There's Trader Joe's. This is Market Street, actually, where we are. And Central School's over here. And so you'll see Market Street going all the way through to whatever that is, Heinz Road,
And this is
right?
where those new houses.
Those new
that
houses
housing is
are
being
right
built.
over there.
So
So
you're
the
talking-
green spaces that you were asking about, you're gonna see them drop in. And this street right here is if you went straight, instead of going right to Healthy Living, that's Garden Street. That's already planned and told that that's gonna
That's
happen.
When you go into
Right.
Trader Joe's, there's a barrier, a little bridge.
That
You
exits
turn
out,
left or right. That's gonna go
And
across.
Midas Drive,
Minus, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it intersects with Market Street and then exits on Midas.
so right near Al's actually.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's some more of the green space that you
Did the blue mall disappear?
just make
Is
it.
that what
Yeah, the
happened?
Blue Mall does
Just
go
disappeared.
away. Yeah, which Duncan, who won't play
Yeah, he's
against
not
George,
too
was kind of
thrilled
like,
about,
"Whoa!"
yeah.
First time I saw it, I was sitting next to him. He was like,
What do you have planned?
Yeah.
and now
So
just
this is Dumont Park. That's a park that the city already owns. And they're gonna-
and when you see the parking dropping in, and this is again something that I learned last year. Helen was talking about the tax increment financing to support infrastructure and parking. If they're municipal parking facilities, those are the kinds of places that tax increment financing can support, as well as like curbs, streets, infrastructure, all those kind of things. Those are
Where'd the
built.
road go? 'Cause I didn't know.
I mean, this is almost like a monopoly, right?
Yeah.
Like you're just
Yeah,
dropping
yeah.
houses.
It's that easy.
Yeah, right. As if. So it's gonna take a fly down the street in a second.
And you've heard a little bit about a potential proposed arena as well, which I'm not sure that shows on here,
doesn't.
right?
No,
Mr. John?
that
It's
came,
a
that
different
It would
animation.
be in this area or
concept
no?
Came
was-
later.
It would be right
Right.
here.
So, yeah,
It would be right
Well,
over here.
but I think it's actually gonna be at U Mall. I
right,
think they've really pulled back.
yeah.
I'm not so sure that that's UVM is the outfit that's going to say that, right? Whether it's U-Mall or here.
Right.
I mean, they're doing a study right now. They're looking at 3 sites.
Memorial
Potential
Auditorium.
Memorial Auditorium here and U-Mall. And you might know something I don't know,
Yeah, I
but
think they're more interested in U Mall.
Well, would
Because I
they-
think they could go for it with
yeah,
this. I
They would
mean,
have
it's
to
like
sell the school,
so.
right?
They would have to buy the
Have
school.
to
We would-
own
Yeah.
Right.
to allow them to.
The community would need to agree to that, that's right,
Right.
yeah.
So what I heard at the last meeting at Chamberlain, because Elizabeth said that the school board would not allow any transfer of land without a vote, even though a vote would not be required to transfer it from the district to the city.
I think that's accurate.
But the school
Okay.
board is saying they would ask for a vote.
we've had some feedback from people on both sides. We'd love to hear from you guys a little bit more today on what you think about whether we need a survey or not, because some people have said don't spend money on it, you spend enough money on consultants, and surveys can be really complicated, and understanding the results of them can be really messy, and if they're not designed properly, it can be a big challenge and it can actually hinder the process. Other people have said the only way you're going to get input from certain people is to do a survey, because there are a lot of people who can't come to meetings or who don't feel comfortable reaching out to the board directly, so you need to have a broad survey in order to get broad feedback. So we're still talking about it. We haven't really dug in yet, and we're not talking to anyone about a survey. If we were to do that, the idea would be to try to do that probably over the summer so that we can analyze those results. The ideal thing, from my perspective, and I'm just speaking for myself now, the board has mentioned this in some of their meetings a little bit, but I think the biggest proponent of it really is to try to have a decision made and a process or a proposal on an option by fall, by near the start of school, so that we could warn in time to have something on the ballot if there were anything that needed to be on the ballot for the presidential election in November, because that's going to get the broadest community input versus trying to do it on a town meeting day where you often get very late, voter turnout. We feel like a November vote would be very important. A vote would be needed for any time we repurpose school assets. So if we sold a school or decided to close a school, we would need a vote from the voters. And then the bonding that would go with any of these scenarios would also have to obviously be voted upon. And so that would be my ideal timeline. What to see, how we feel after we get through these community meetings, whether that's a realistic timeline or whether it would need to be pushed back a little bit. I think the most important thing is to get it right, as opposed to pushing for that. If the November thing doesn't work, then we need to just make sure that we get it right, because this is something that's going to obviously impact the school district for decades. So it's a really important decision. And getting community input is very, very important to us. So.
On the other side of that, market uncertainty is something we have to be aware of too, because this town enjoys a reputation of having excellent schools. My wife and I almost didn't buy here because we weren't aware of this going on until after we'd actually committed to purchasing a lot here.
Yeah.
So I can imagine, and it's hard to measure statistics on sales that never happened. Yeah. But I can imagine that a lot of people that are thinking of moving to South Burlington are holding back because they want to see what pans out of all this discussion. So I think it's important to recognize that uncertainty in the market is also affecting South Burlington right now, and the sooner we can get a decision made with the accurate information, enough information to make a decision, the better.
I would agree with that. There are a couple of other market issues. Right now interest rates are extremely low. Trying to do bonding, if we were going to do something, is pretty much the ideal time to do that now. We're in a pretty positive economy where, it's a little easier to get big initiatives through than it would be if the economy took a different turn. And the other thing is, we have held up certain things, not critical maintenance, but certain things have been held up at the elementary schools in anticipation of what we're going to do. So for example, there's a very dedicated group of parents at this school who raised a lot of money for the playground, and only phase 1 is done because the school district did not want to commit additional money that we would need to commit to match that parent money that was raised to finish the playground, not knowing whether we were going to consolidate the schools or not. So there are other initiatives like that that are sort of floating around out there waiting for this decision, so we don't want to hold it up unnecessarily. So yes, it's a balance, as in all things. Hi, how are you?
Welcome back.
Just arrived in town.
Martin walked in looking a little sleepy himself this morning. He's like, I'm not going to facilitate unless you really need me to. Great time. Have you met Helen before?
Helen, I don't think so. I'm Kathy Wisłowski.
Hi. Nice to meet you. This is Tom Catlett.
I'm Carson.
In case you don't know, Helen's very tired because she's in the legislature, and so she was there until the
Last
closing.
night.
Yeah.
My condolences.
Yeah, they showed that on the news last night. You guys were working hard.
We were.
There's no doubt. Martin obviously was there too.
I'd love to follow up on that theme of uncertainty. That's one of the things that I've wondered about too, is you have these array of proposals where 1 or 2 or 3 of the elementary schools could fundamentally completely change. how does that affect, the teacher's commitment, their ability to focus? I think about a little bit of the organizational behavior side of this. Is how could you do your job at your very best every day, knowing that maybe next year it was going to be gone? So I do wonder about that. Is there maybe a distraction, or is there sort of a level of anxiety or uncertainty that when you see a big X through your beloved school, how does one manage through that and continue to deliver excellence? So I feel like uncertainty is a real, is a liability. So being clear about timelines for decisions would be, I think, helpful as a parent, but also every day when I drop off and bonding with my school and my teachers, and I love the work. They pour their hearts into it every day.
Yeah.
And I think, gosh, how could you do that if you knew that you might all be, disbanded in a matter of months? So I worry about the quality of education being able to continue if this cloud of uncertainty keeps hanging
There's a
over.
distraction, yeah.
I can tell you from my consulting work with the Fortune 500 companies that 2 words to kill productivity in the corporate world. One of them is buyout,
Yeah.
and the other one is reorg.
Yeah.
That's exactly
And I've seen it firsthand. I've seen productivity go to practically zero when that kind of uncertainty was introduced into a company.
Yeah.
So I suspect something is going on in the schools right now.
That's very good feedback. I will say that David has done a good job of reaching out to the teachers. There's been no formal teacher survey, a broad survey. The administrators were tasked with talking to their own staff and sort of getting their input and their feedback. But David and all of the administrators have been working very closely with their teachers to kind of help them understand where we are in the process. And maybe I should let you guys speak to it a little bit more, but my understanding is that a lot of teachers are very excited about the possibility of consolidation, because really and on the teacher level, it would mean very few redundancies, realistically, because you're still educating the same number of kids. I mean, there might be around the edges a few, but it's not going to be like a massive layoff if we closed a school. The big thing that I've heard out of the process is really the teachers would be excited to be in the same building with the other people who are teaching at the same level. They are excited about the ideas for collaboration and all of that. So I'm sensing a positive vibe, but you might be able to speak to it a lot better because you're in the school. So
so just to be clear that everybody still gets would most likely still be teaching the next year, right? No one's losing, because as a district, it's one contract for everybody, right? So, so like right now, if we're going to lose somebody, we have to shift among schools. So just to say, and I don't think that there would be I think the principals are pretty tasked going into to make sure that we are focused and looking at our targets for educational concerns. I don't think that would be a big one. I think people would be excited in the end once we are ready to reveal. I think, we have a lot of veteran teachers who have been through this for the last 20 years. I don't know when the original talk was, but we've heard about how there was the new city center has been around. It was going to be around the 90s, is my understanding, right? So a lot of teachers have heard this. So some of our veteran teachers have heard about it a long time. I think they would be very excited. I think that that efficiency model, to have all the same grades together, could really, for professional development, for planning and coordination of curriculum, because we have a lot of new curriculum going. I think that they would be excited about that piece. I think they're very comfortable with it, right? Some of the teachers in the orchard live in the orchards, and so that would make them sad. But again, at the same time, it's a blessing to be teaching in South Burlington or to be an administrator in South Burlington. So we do what we need to. So I think it's a little bit mixed, but I also think that they would be excited in the future. I think they want to give their feedback too. So I think we'll have to focus on that in the near future too.
Okay, good. I'm glad, because I've talked to a few teachers at Chamberlain. They live in the Chamberlain neighborhood, and I think that Chamberlain they feel is too small, but I think that scenario 5 they feel is too big. So that's just feedback I've gotten from a couple of teachers at Chamberlain, that 3 to 4 colleagues working at a grade level is a really ideal number, as opposed to 8 or as opposed to 2.
Yeah.
So
I've also had feedback from Holly, at Chamberlain specifically, that it's a challenge for the teachers and the staff when there's so many different programs that are in place that need committees or that need, you know, teachers to sort of help operate them. And when you get to the size that Chamberlain is now, that's a big additional task on top of what they're trying to do every day to be at these extra meetings. And there's just a small pool where, you know, Orchard and Central, we have a bigger pool, and not everyone's taking on so much service in addition to their daily, you know.
But I'm also looking at the lunch times for Central. You have a very small lunchroom, and it's the biggest school, and you start lunch at 10:50.
It would have to be adjusted, there's no doubt.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's also maybe a little bit of, you know,
Logistical challenge.
Well, I don't think,
Yeah,
I don't think
yeah.
they would serve that many kids in one cafeteria.
well, of course our grades are smaller at Chamberlain, but we go 2 grades at a time, I
Right.
think. At
But I'm just saying, if
Chamberlain.
if we did consolidate, I don't think it would be one kitchen serving, you know, hundreds of kids at a time. or
Oh, I
something.
see, yeah.
No, I think
got
what you
you.
end up doing, you create a school within a school, so you really still have pods of places where you kind of keep them separate, because I know that that's the concern, and you want to make sure that you still have somewhat of an intimate environment, because I think, you know, that's a very legitimate concern as a parent. You know, it is a large school, large-sized school, so how do you create a more cohesive community and still have the advantages of being in one building where there's increased collaboration, increased opportunities for the kids as well, that really for logistical reasons couldn't be provided. You know? So I think, you know, there are a lot of things to be considered. I can speak a little bit for the middle school, because some of those obviously impact 5th graders coming over to the middle school, which is really not a new concept. Obviously, we talked about it 3 years ago, something like this, and had extensive research done also. The benefit that teachers would see for the kids especially, it's a very difficult transition to the middle school. You know, parents are very cautious and they worry and those kind of things. We have what we call looping teams in 7th and 8th grade, that, which means that essentially the same teachers create a community, they have the same students for 2 years in a row. The curriculum, I think it makes a difference because they're clearly aware of what has been taught. They get to know the kids very well. I think that's a very critical component, and the students really build a community. The other thing that's sometimes being overlooked is it really increases the amount of instructional time. When you think about how much time is being built or is used at the beginning of each school year to build that kind of a community, to make sure that students are aware of rules and those kind of things, well, guess what? In 8th grade, they hit the ground running, so to speak. They don't have to do those kind of things anymore, and that's sometimes being overlooked. The transition to the middle school, I think, would really improve with 5th grade coming over and 5th and 6th grade teachers then being on looping teams. That's really what the intention is. So I personally would actually advocate, you know, and for rightful reasons, I think advocate for a solution that would bring 5th grade over to us. And there is a reasonable amount of excitement.
Since we've gotten on that topic, would you mind talking about some of the concerns that parents have had as well, and sort of the reason that there was pushback and, you know, some of the things that
I'm going to say, because I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
I don't know anything. Kindergarten right now.
I think the concerns are very similar to probably the concerns that you have right now building one elementary school. You know, parents are very cautious sending their 5th graders over to a large-sized middle school, not realizing that we could also create a school within a school and keep 5th graders away from 8th graders. You know, of course, that's a concern. That's a rightful concern as a parent to send their small little 5th graders to those 8th graders, right? I mean, it's a time when the kids grow, and they grow, you know, certainly physically, emotionally, socially. A lot of changes occur over those years. And, you know, as a parent, rightfully so, you're worried to send your 5th graders over to the 8th graders that really end up being young adults moving on to the high school. And I think it's a rightful concern. So that's where it becomes our responsibility, but also opportunity, you know, to keep the kids in a more cohesive environment, you know. what that could look like. We could keep fifth graders on our first floor and really kind of keep them away. You stagger times when they go from class to class and those kind of things. So you really have more of an elementary feeling for fifth and sixth graders.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that a little bit, because
Yeah.
that is something that I hadn't quite understood until we sat at the Chamberlain meeting, and you mentioned this, that right now the sixth graders are kind of the ones who are lost a little bit in the shuffle, because they are transitioning in, but they're not in a looping team, and they're kind of separate from the seventh and eighth graders and have different concerns. Moving the fifth graders up to be with them would sort of ease that experience for the sixth graders, and it would create a little bit more of an elementary school feel for that first half of middle school. So one of the questions that was raised at the table last week was, what about outside time? You know, the fifth graders are would be going from, you know, elementary school where they have recess and all of that, and what about outside time, which is right now very, very, very short.
For sixth graders, that is correct.
But if fifth graders were to come in, things would be adjusted a little bit more to look a little bit more like elementary school with more outside time and sort of a different pace than what the seventh and eighth graders would
The irony of all of this, if you brought fifth grade over, it would really benefit the sixth graders.
Yeah.
You could actually keep the sixth graders more away from the seventh and eighth graders. You build a fifth, sixth grade community.
More like big brothers to the fifth graders
Right.
instead of
Yeah.
little brothers and sisters.
They would, and you could create kind of a sixth graders would still be a continuation of elementary school, whereas right now they're kind of patched onto middle school. They still go to dances and those kind of things, and it's one of those decisions I think we could make. You know, fifth and sixth grade could be more cohesive, and could be actually physically even kept away from the seventh and eighth grade. So I think even there is a benefit. The other benefit I didn't mention is opportunities. You know, I strongly encourage you to take a look at the musical right now, which is a state-of-the-art musical that we're going on right now, and I think you can vouch for that. Susie knows that very well. 2 o'clock and 7 o'clock.
Over.
At the middle school?
And the reason,
You can do both.
and honestly, it is phenomenal. I rarely have seen any high schools that have this kind of caliber, let alone middle schools. But that's just one example. We have world languages that are currently not being offered at the elementary school. We have all kinds of clubs, community activities that are not offered at the elementary school. And once again, that provides some of those opportunities that are really exciting. And I have to say, our staff would be extremely excited about this. You can sense a little bit of excitement on my part. You know, I think it is important, though, you know, to look at all of those aspects. And we did that 3 years ago. And the irony of it was the parents that were so apprehensive to send their kids, they came to our community meeting. You know, we have a fifth grade orientation meeting, and they all responded, wow, I didn't know all of those things. You know, they were very positively impressed and saw that we are excited, motivated to create a neat opportunity for the kids there, you know.
Yeah,
One of the concerns was, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I have had 2 kids, and so I'm glad to hear that it would be more of an elementary feel for the 5th and the 6th, because I could not imagine putting a 5th grader into that middle school schedule. That was my biggest, because that's the hugest, oh, no.
They're not even together on that.
No, the schedule, meaning that, you know, you are in this room, and then you change with your backpack, and you go to the next room, and you don't have the recess time, you don't have... It's just not elementary school. It's like your memory of when you changed to the big school. Do you remember that?
Actually,
you know, changing
in
room.
the same school, so I'm learning a lot about it.
Oh, okay, all right. So
that's
I had a
okay.
junior high. I had a 7th and an 8th, and so it was a big thing to go to junior high, right? And so maybe that's a problem.
Well, no, if I had a magic wand,
That's where they meet.
if I had a magic wand, I would erase Tuttle and start over again. That's what I would do.
Right, yeah, I understand. So one of the struggles that we have as a board and that David has with the, you know, administration is trying to deal with classroom sizes with 3 different elementary schools. It's a real, you can probably speak to this better than me, Brent, but a real challenge. And he's constantly trying to negotiate do we need an extra teacher? Oh, there's 2 more kids, and trying to negotiate with us, and we're saying, bang, no, too expensive. We don't want to go to the taxpayers with this. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
This being my first year here, when we start to look at staff allocation, we start to get into some struggles around your class numbers, your class size numbers could be right on that threshold. It could be 2 sections or 3 sections, and that same thing could be happening at Orchard and Chamberlain. So there's pressures right now, there's pressures at kindergarten, because some kindergartens are large. Incoming kindergartens can be large at all 3 elementary schools next year.
Yeah.
So 2 or 3 students could swing whether you need another teacher or not. You have 2 teachers, you have 13 in the class, but you can't have one first grade teacher who's 26 class that's too large. The struggle of balancing those.
So Brent, I'm just want to play this card to talk about what would happen if all the kids, all the grade levels were in one school, and how that would be alleviated.
You have more flexibility of staff.
Yeah.
You know your population, and then if you have to shift, you'll be shifting within your school building. So if you need to add another section of 6 or 7 section, and your school buildings to have to look at the teacher transfer from building to building.
Right.
Can you more easily do like a 1-2 class that way, or is that how you manage the current 3 elementary schools for those?
So we don't really do
classes
looping anymore here, right?
They used to.
Yeah.
They used to at Orchard too.
We did last year, actually.
Right.
What did you have, a K?
My daughter did, she had the same teacher for
Right.
second and third and same class.
Looping, right?
Yeah.
Like,
But it
I think
wasn't
you're
mixed.
talking about different things.
okay.
It wasn't a mixed K1 class.
that's what I was
Was it the same teacher that took?
It was
from-
just the same teacher
Okay,
for 2
'cause
years in the
there's-
same
there's-
class for 2 years.
Yeah, but they used to actually mix like K1 together,
With whom?
and then the ones would leave and a new K would come in the next year with the same teacher. You know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
okay.
Yeah, and then they'd have a 1-2 class. They did that for a while, but I don't think they.
Yeah.
Curriculum, it's not as easy to articulate it in a grade. There's much more specificity for an individual grade, whether it's math, literacy, science, next generation science, and all of those things are starting to significantly affect how we use. We put age groups together, it challenges the teacher to universally provide that level of depth for our students.
And in younger grades, when you have kids of different ages together, I mean,
Yeah.
at some of those ages, just being 7 months, older than the other kids can make a huge difference.
It's not as educationally appropriate anymore because of the content which we're trying to teach. It is still common practice, and some of our, Vermont schools are
Doing that.
Part of that is because of the size. It's a economic issue of trying to provide. You got X kids here and X kids, you put them together. Otherwise, you have a really, really small first grade or second grade class. So it still does exist, but it's not easy to administer.
When do you have any questions about what Brent was talking about in terms of when the predictability of class size in a larger system is easier than in this smaller system? Do you have any
totally
questions
understand that.
Okay.
But I'm just curious because that seems like a really tiny issue to sell 3 schools and make a mega
Exactly.
school. You know what I mean? That's kind of a small can of worms, honestly, when you're talking about the amount of money and the amount of scale that you're putting into this.
I think from our perspective, from my perspective, it's one of many pressures that the school system faces. You know what I mean? And it's one that, at least during my tenure on the board, has gotten more and more problematic.
Yeah.
Having kindergarten is always kind of a wild card, and I think that's universal because you don't know, as much as they try really hard to figure out who's coming in, and there's oftentimes big fluctuations in August, and people are moving and they don't tell you, and this is an issue. But even the other classes now, we're seeing more and more at higher elementary school grades, 4th grade, big problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and they had a 5th grade problem last
huge
year.
problem, right? And that's really tricky. And it's not really a small economic thing to hire a full FTE.
It increases your cost by 100% when you think about it. So, and I think the school committee hears about cost containment, and so just operating 5 campuses actually is a pretty significant investment in terms of those kinds of. So there's no question that there's a lot of financial. We could run 6 small schools. You know what I mean? If you could imagine, and it would be a lot more expensive. So it's always that at what cost will the community support, these kinds of educational structures that we have. So that, I think that's often where the school committee finds themselves is kind of in between that, the parent group that says, I don't want to have 27 kids in my 4th grade, and the taxpayer group that says,
are you kidding me?
But we already pay, our taxes are too high already. Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's in the balance.
But to be fair, David's spreadsheet on the consolidated, K4 showed a wash in FTEs. There were no FTE savings at all.
Well,
So just keep that in mind from an overall tax perspective, right? There really is no savings in terms of manpower, woman power, person power.
Yeah, so I didn't go to the march, but I believe my fiance did, and she came back with the paperwork, and I didn't really see where the savings was.
Yeah.
So it's like you imagine that there should be savings in where there like potential property. Like there's one big property to maintain, but at the same time there should be efficiencies. Like there should be efficiency in heating systems and electronic systems and stuff like that. So there should be some efficiency. The same with manpower. Well, we have one principal instead of 4 or 3 or whatever. So there should be savings, but at the same time we should have the same number of staff, but then I never saw those savings. So I'm like, is there I don't want to pay $3 million for this huge facility if we're not going to have any savings down the road.
3?
I wish
No,
if we could do it for 3, we would.
I guess
We built 3 new schools and these were 3.
Where's
Yeah.
the 65 million?
Where's
the okay.
And part of what you're part of what we're talking about in these examples is that we're dealing with, in reality, 5 50-plus-year-old schools. And so no matter what, we're going to be dealing, and we do deal with old structures and the problems related to old structures on a daily basis. Pat has a project going on with the elevator at the high school. This has been going on. This will be the 2nd summer we're dealing with this. And the reason that it's taken us 2 summers is because it is an old building, and it is such a big deal to make it come to code and to deal with the structures around it. Isn't that? Tell me if I'm wrong. And here, in all of these schools, in your school, what happens is when we want to make a change and make it more energy efficient, we'll take the windows at the high school. We think we can do the windows on both of these wings of the high school in one summer. Well, no, we've got PCBs when we take the windows apart, and this requires abatement and tons more money. I mean, it's just kind of it's fine if you don't touch it. Once you touch it to make a change, it's not fine anymore. So those are the kinds of costs that you would save in a larger new school,
Unless 25 years down the road they go, oh, that caulking you used in 2019 had this thing in it. I mean, no offense, but I mean, it's
I
like
understand.
My house
every
is 50
environment.
years
There's
old.
the
I'm not
problems
going
we
to
know
tear
and
it
the
down and build
problems
a
we
new
don't.
one.
No, I understand. Yeah, I totally
So
understand.
to me, that's what everyone's saying. is
I don't
tear
mean to
your
play
house down and
devil's
build a
advocate
new
with you
one.
all the time here,
you know
okay?
what?
But-
I'm not actually.
So you
yeah.
can just tell me to be quiet if you want, because
It's
this is
fine.
your.
No, that's why we're
Yeah.
here. And it's not. I'm not advocating for anything in particular. I'm trying to get your
Also,
views.
To me, I hear a lot about the high school, and yet we're talking about the elementary schools.
Right.
So that's what I don't understand, why our focus is so much on the elementary schools.
Right.
When, I mean, you're a high school, obviously, I don't.
In terms of facility,
yeah,
you're not going to hurt
yeah.
my feelings if you.
I've never been in the high school, or I have, but I don't have much experience with the high school yet.
Yeah, I think there's no question that we have needs in all 5 of our buildings. They were all built around the same time. It's not, I would say, the hallmark of municipal construction in our nation's history. And so, there's a lot of people who are high school principals in 100-year-old buildings, and they're much better off than principals in 30 and 40-year-old buildings because of some of the, it's just kind of the way it is, They're not better off in terms of issues like ADA and other kinds of accessibility issues, but we unfortunately have those too, you know what I mean? So it's just a reality, and it's honestly, it's a reality across Vermont, across the country.
Right.
That there was this population boom, there were a lot of schools built, that population boom has kind of settled down, and now communities with not as many kids and maybe not the civic mindedness to rally around youth, but massive needs in terms of infrastructure. And so, I mean, it's going to take a lot of courageous conversations in terms of investing in school facilities, I think, around the country, and definitely in this city, no question. You know, so, and I don't think any scenario, and all those scenarios that, I mean, that graphic is so simplistic. All those scenarios include like pretty significant upgrades at all levels and investments on the part of the community into our infrastructure, and not just with an eye on you know, ceiling tiles that are falling out in my gym, which seems like, okay, that's like level one, but also with an eye on, you know, what kinds of instructional spaces do we need for kids to really work in science, technology, engineering, and math, you know, and is the old school desks in rows, teacher in front of classroom, which is what our school's built for, is that really the kinds of instructional modalities that we're going to be, you know, using when your kindergarten gets to me? I mean, it's already, our school's a lot different. My juniors and seniors right now are experiencing a different school than the school that existed when they were in kindergarten, you know, in terms of curriculum, instruction, and assessment. I suspect that kind of change is going to continue for when your kids come through. Yeah. And, you know, we're kind of making it work right now. Yeah. You know what I mean? We're kind of just, and I have the best teachers. So
but it's not perfect.
There's no question.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think it's going to continue to be a challenge.
Right,
you know?
right.
So.
And my kids are in elementary school, so obviously I'm concerned about that. But I mean, I also want them to have the facilities available when they get to your school. Yeah. And I'm hearing a lot of, you know, issues and whatnot for the high school, so that concerns me. Like, science and technology is important, but to me, it seems like a bigger deal to high schoolers. You know, that they need that more. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And I think that one of my concerns is that it's around our pre-K through 12 costs, and so I'll speak with a little bit of bias towards the high school, although I try not to in these discussions. But,
no, you're doing a good job of being even.
Right, I mean, they're the kids that are coming to me, so I have to make sure they're when districts do face financial crises in terms of operating budget, so like passing the budget on town meeting day, and communities are reluctant to support significant tax increases, and they say to the school committee, we need you to make some cuts. Those cuts almost always come 9 through 12. Almost always, because the reality is Brent's operation is pretty straightforward. It's like, you know, whereas you know, what we provide for kids at the high school level, you know, far exceeds the minimum, you know, and that's what the communities come to expect. And so if you look at what's happening at BHS right now, a lot of the unrest there in terms of the student body and the teaching faculty on some level is around that. The fact that their budget crisis isn't at the high school; it's pre-K through 12. The places that they're taking hits is at the high school, and so I feel pretty protective of the programs that we have. And so when my boss or the school committee tells me that I have to cut things, I'm really reluctant to do that.
And so he's dealing with that, and that's where your extra teacher comes in. You know, and we're saying like, oh, we need another teacher in Brent's 4th grade. Right. So what are we going to take? Where are we going to take away from anything? And the sad truth is, Mr. Burke's right. Oftentimes that comes from his programming,
or your checkbook.
Or your checkbook, and that's both are bad for us. Do you know what I mean? So not bad. I shouldn't say that. It's difficult. Yes.
Would redistrict.
So that's the next thing I wanted to talk about, actually. Yeah. So that's a definite. I don't even want to say possibility, because I think in the future, if we stay where we are, that's a probability. And so I would like to get what your senses are on that, because that will affect all 3 schools. And you know, I heard some people say, oh, that would only affect Rick Marcotte. No, it would affect all 3 schools.
I mean, I feel like when we moved here, we kind of got the impression that like Central and Orchard were the schools to go at. You know, that Chamberlain was not as good of a school to be perfectly honest.
Okay.
But as I've lived here and met more parents and learned more,
Yeah.
I think I'd be perfectly comfortable sending my kids to Chamberlain.
Right, okay, interesting, yeah.
I mean, since we live right next to Orchard,
Yeah.
probability is that we would,
Right.
I would think that you would want to.
Yeah, it all depends how the lines are drawn, but yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, it might be easy for me to say, yeah, go ahead and redistrict.
Right.
But I think I would be fine
Right.
sending them.
Okay.
I mean, my issue would be, I don't want them to sit on a bus and go all the way across
Sure.
town when
Yeah.
we have a school right there.
A model for multi-use of space already and business community cooperation. If you go to Champlain in the morning, you'll notice that Champlain Chocolate's parking lot, the front lot, is used for drop-off. So it's multi-use of space. Nobody's shopping at Champlain Chocolates yet because the store hasn't opened.
Right.
But that parking lot is being utilized by the school district. So that, in de facto, you have an extra parking lot that the district didn't have to pay for outright, and it's being multi-used because during the day when students aren't being dropped off, it's being used by the store. Also, the businesses are within walking distance of the school. They serve as field trip sites for the classes. The schools, businesses, and residents are all partners in that community. It's a very tight-knit community. And like I said before, I think keeping all three strong is what makes that community successful. So
you think a school in Long City Center would be okay?
I think it'd be great. I know my son, he goes to Champlain right now. They've done field trips to Champlain Chocolates, DPW. I think they're planning one for Burlington Furniture Company. And they're probably doing a couple others down there too. There's tons of businesses down Pine Street that are supporting the schools in other ways. So I think that's just an opportunity for Marcotte to have some more community involvement and some more support from the local businesses.
And I think the other thing too that came out in other discussions, especially at Chamberlain, but that the schools viewed from, where do you want to move in a when you're moving into an area, I think moving next to a school is something that families do seek to do. And so I understand the administrative ease of having it all in one building, but there's the kind of from the residents' perspective, having these buildings really be anchors, I think is a reality, and it is a real magnet for neighborhood vitality, and I think that needs to be included. I know it's not one of necessarily included in the criteria that the school board's been looking at, but
it is.
It is? Oh, good. Okay, good.
I think so.
Okay,
for
good.
sure. The
Yeah,
community
definitely.
aspect. I don't know if you've,
Okay.
we've posted the frequently asked questions that came out of the March 22nd meeting, and we'll continue to update those. We don't have answers to them, but we have the questions posted on the district website. There's a whole chunk that's about community and what happens to communities and what is the impact
Well, I
of
meant
communities.
for these 5 scenarios, I guess. Did that go factor into these 5 scenarios, or into the task force, or into?
In terms of
I
like,
probably misspoke.
Like having a weighting factor for each of them.
so there's no quantitative
Right.
number that's
Right.
been assigned to those things. It is something that we are considering as we go through this process. So I know that we
Got it.
focus a lot on what are the educational opportunities, what's the financial cost, but the impact on the community is very important to us, and we do talk a lot about that, and we'll continue to as we go forward.
I
That's
misspoke. I
That's part
misspoke
of the
earlier.
reason that we have all of you here is that we want to hear your thoughts. I mean, Loretta gave us very clear feedback at the last meeting about, my question was, especially with regards to Chamberlain, a lot of people have said, well, the school is very noisy because of the airport and likely only to grow noisier with the F-35s and, increased airport traffic. And, would you prefer that the kids be somewhere else where maybe it wasn't as noisy? Or is that school an important enough anchor to your community that you want that school there? And we got loud and clear feedback, not just from Loretta, but everybody really at the table that, we want the school here.
I misspoke. I meant part of this
Well, and that's
scenario.
a great question,
Yeah.
because as I recall from the 22nd meeting, the scenarios were sort of presented, and then it was almost like a process of elimination of how do we solve each of these, and how does option 5 sort of present, a concept to really sort of address all of the issues. And I'm not sure that neighborhood or community anchor was one of those. Maybe it was more about addressing the issues or the inequities versus preserving what's good.
Your comments about community and Chamberlain make me think about another scenario that I've heard some people floating recently, and that's a scenario 6 that would essentially close Marcotte and build a new school for Chamberlain in that area, but away from moving north of its current location. And those would be the 2 elementary schools in the city. And I don't know if anyone has heard more
Bridget
details
mentioned
about
it at the beginning.
We're not closing Central though.
Yeah.
No,
I
it was.
might have option 6. We have not,
thought it
as I
was
said,
moving
I thought it was more moving Chamberlain,
Park.
yeah.
Yeah,
I thought, yeah,
Essentially.
that was my understanding.
that's the way we had
Yeah,
presented
that's the
it.
way I had heard option
Yeah.
6 presented, not necessarily closing
close to
Central.
Jackson, or some
Yeah.
area that's
some
now
Right.
owned by the university.
And as I said it at the outset, we've taken that on board. It's not something that we're digging into very deeply at the moment. We need to sort of finish this process with the community feedback meetings.
I'm sorry, I think one aspect that should also be looked at, are they truly neighborhood schools right now? How many students are currently being bused to those schools? If you truly look at the configuration, it is quite a few. Chamberlain, some of the students come from way in the south, and it's unbelievable. So that, whatever we do, we still have to look at as well. Are they truly neighborhood schools? How many students actually walk to the school?
Well, there's a debate about that. There's a big debate about that. And the other side of that debate is really, regardless of how many people are bused to them, people feel that they're community schools. Maybe neighborhood's not the right term, because neighborhood does imply that it's kids
that
only
they
from
walk
the
to the
neighborhood, they're all
school,
walking
right.
there.
Yeah.
But I think even Central kids Central sort of the least neighborhood of the 3 schools, because a lot of Orchard kids do walk and ride bikes to school, same for Chamberlain. Even Central, people feel it's their community school. And I think that goes to another aspect of community that's not just the place necessarily, but having a small school, it is easier to kind of get your brain around.
The familiarity
Yeah,
aspect.
so you can
know
sort of start to
everybody's
get to know the parents of 300 other students. You start to understand faces and names and backgrounds of different families, and you start to sort of feel entrenched. A bigger school, that's a little more overwhelming. I think about it as, I volunteer right now in my son's preschool, and organizing something for a few hundred families, like an event or an activity or something, is something that I feel like I could do.
Bravo, Bridget.
Organizing something for 800 kids and their families and all that feels like a completely different,
it's a
different thing. And not to say that there won't be people who will do it, and sometimes, people have raised the argument that perhaps kids that, don't get those opportunities might have those if you have a bigger group of parents, organizing things and everything's all under one umbrella. But, there are sort of arguments we made on both sides of that neighborhood school question.
I'd love to follow up on, unless there's another topic that we want to continue with, but the inequities too, because I'd love to know, and I think you'd mentioned earlier that you're still in the process of, really kind of nailing down what those are. The March 22nd meeting, I heard that, there were inequities in maybe languages or arts, but it felt very, like at a very broad level, and I wanted to know, could we more specifically describe what those inequities are, and then could we ask parents if those matter? Because I think there's some things there that, from a personal perspective, I have a kindergartner. I'm really interested in him developing his character and being, a really good member of his kindergarten class. Having 4 languages available is not my priority list right now. Community and sense of belonging and stewardship and character is. And so I'd love to sort of hear more about those inequities and then hear how we're measuring.
And we have asked for those to be laid out more specifically. So exactly what they are. So what are the programs that if there are any that are not offered. The example that keeps getting raised is that, and I'm sure this is going to change now that you're one of the presidents of the PTO, is that
Before day one.
no, for example, Central's PTO raises a whole lot of money, and some of that money has been used to put technology in the classroom, and that's a hard, concrete thing that those students now have access to. The question is, how big is that difference? And then I think that, so the question to me is three parts. So it's what are the inequities really clearly, like data, you know, yeah. So are there math coaches in one place that aren't there, or there are more math coaches in one than the other, or reading coaches? You know, are there data that we can really pin this to? And I'm envisioning a matrix, you know, that says exactly what is offered every place and how many kids get to take advantage of it and not. And so then the second piece is, does it matter to the parents? You know, what are the parents' priorities? The third is, you know, if there are real inequities, can we address them? How do we address them in each scenario? So obviously, it's simplest for sure if everybody's in one building, because then you know everybody's got access to the same programs and the same teachers and all that. But are there ways that we can efficiently address those in other scenarios that aren't as expensive as building a brand new school, or aren't as, you know...
And can we make them more immediate? For instance, if there really is an equity, let's say access to laptops.
Right. Is there a way to get a grant from someplace?
Yeah, why don't we get a grant? Why don't we talk to Small Dog? Why don't we talk to IBM? Or, Global Foundries, or anybody else?
Or Dell, who provides our laptops for the older students in high school. Yeah. So those are things that are still being worked on.
Okay.
Those are still things that are being worked on, and yeah, I've been asking those questions as the rest of the board has as well.
And I just wanted to jump in and say, I think that different school populations might have different lists of priorities too.
Yep.
I mean, obviously moving into the school district was a priority when we moved here, but then on top of that, I wanted my child to walk to school.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to have to be in my car. I don't even drive to work.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a priority for everybody, right?
Right.
So for me to have my child bus far away, or I'd have to drive far away, I'm changing my whole kind of life value kind of organization of what I wanted to accomplish by moving where I moved. Do you see what I'm saying? So there might be different values that people have, you know, kind of put into their choices already, and you vote with your feet, kind of, you know, so to speak. So it's, I just wanted to throw that out there, but go.
Can I mention inequities, because there aren't any inequities in our curricular areas, like what's offered in music or library at one elementary school is offered at all of them. So that's and as far as coaching goes, that, like you mentioned, coaches or special education or anything, those are all growing, and the district looks at that to add each year. Sometimes we've gone without, and sometimes when the time's right, we add. So it's not so much that, to me, and Holly can't be here right now to discuss it, but I think she would like to talk about it here, is that the different populations at the different schools are starting to grow in different directions. So there's approximately, I don't have the current figures, but my understanding is that students that qualify for free lunches at Chinton was up to 35%. Sorry, the free lunch, we don't do reduced lunch anymore in the state. That's a great thing that the state does.
Yeah.
I thank you for that.
Is there a school there?
This is the current year right here. So Chamberlain is at last year this was 37%. This year is at 33%. So that speaks to the struggles of you know, everyday living there in some households, right?
And how does that compare to the other schools?
So Orchard this year, David just gave me, is 23%, and Central is 17%. So they've all increased, but it's starting to look a little different now.
What was last year's for the other two?
The last year for Orchard was 22, and for Central was 13. Yeah.
The middle
all
school
of
is
them.
actually under 20%.
Yeah.
So.
And then the other interesting piece about this also, this is really interesting for Orchard, is that like right now we anticipate at least 8 of our incoming kindergartners, it's going to be about 25% of our are going to need the language assistance because they do not speak English at home. And not all those will qualify for English language learning, but we see each year I'd say we're going about 25% each of our grades moving in. We were at one point 18% of our kids not speaking, qualifying for English language services. It's just a different demographic. It's really, it's one of the reasons why I love my job is we have so many cultures moving in. And I think Susie sees this all the time when she visits, because Susie visits all the time. But it looks different than each of the schools, and we can accommodate that, right? We have added in the past more English language teaching at Orchard, but we also don't want to get our place into 3 silos of schools with completely different demographics. And I think Judy, the principal before, would always argue that we need to mix up more. She was actually very strong about saying the neighborhood concept school can be very damaging for some schools. And she was a very strong leader. So, but she would argue for that we need to equalize our demographics as much as possible, so that everybody gets the same opportunities and has the same, as much as possible, similar classroom environments.
Well, I think that's where
I would celebrate the people that are coming in with the different languages.
Oh, it's awesome. I tell you, it's awesome. It's a surprise. It's a gem of. No, it's not, and I don't mean to put it that way at all. It's just that
Orchard really celebrates.
Right, yeah.
Is what I witness for sure. All the schools do,
Oh,
and then
absolutely.
maybe are figuring out as a community how can we honor the families who are coming with their children, right? And because they're not here today, right? And they haven't been at our other community meetings. And so maybe
Because they don't speak English.
But this is exactly my
I live
point,
with
right?
them.
Like how do we do a good job as thinking about the civic responsibility of each of us and what we want to give our kindergartners? How do we actually model that as adults, right? So that when we're having these conversations, we also invite in those voices as well. And then the other thing, Mark spoke so eloquently about this. I just wanted to add that because I'm a learner in all this as well, and one of the very powerful things that I've learned is that maybe if you all would be good ambassadors for that free lunch statistic and help us as a school district make clear when we talk about that, there's just the potential for that to be hurtful in a way that's not intentional.
Yeah.
And so what I'd like to point out that I've learned from people wiser than I is that we just want to be careful that we're not labeling, of course, but also that statistic is not an accurate portrayal of what we consider poverty rates, because not all of our families, there's pride, right? And so just that gentle reminder that we all have pride in different ways, we all have stories, and so it just feels really important to remember to speak for those who aren't
And it's
here.
also not a guaranteed predictor of performance. If you
Absolutely.
Look at Montgomery
Absolutely.
School as an
Thank you.
example, you're talking one of the poorest communities in the state, and they made top 10 several
Which
times.
school?
Montgomery.
Oh, yeah.
So that was, I think they were up to 50% free and reduced lunch at that school at the time I looked at it. So,
Absolutely, because the people in my neighborhood that get free and reduced lunch, they are so avid that they want their kids to get a good education.
Absolutely.
No question. And they're totally supportive of Chamberlain as the place they want their kids to get a good education. So, and the kids are getting a good education.
And I think the circumstances for each student getting a free and reduced lunch are quite varied and different. You could have a mom that's a drug addict, the grandparents have to take care of the child and have custody. You could have immigrants that don't speak the language.
So I Googled
First generation
sitting on my phone.
educational system. You have people that are extremely poor.
Can't hear you.
That's okay.
I just wanted to jump back in that because I'm sort of having an aha moment. Is the fundamental premise of these scenarios to address, I just heard from you that there are no curriculum differences.
Correct. Yep.
That's not what I took away on March 22nd. I took away that there were some very specific curriculum differences that this would...
Like art, you're thinking like math or art or what?
Science, languages, art.
There are no
Languages have not been offered.
There's
Yeah.
one. I'm sorry, Bridget.
Languages have not been offered for a while at any of the elementary schools.
But that's not an inequity if it doesn't exist anywhere.
No.
Right. So that was
As far as
the aha
curricular
moment for
goes,
me, is that I took away there's a curriculum imbalance from March 22nd. So that's a
I would-
really...
Know everybody quickly, but we have
Salsa marching band. You guys don't have that. I mean, whatever. There's just, some of that's just a high school kid moving, but.
I work in Charleston County, South Carolina, which is the county, 180 miles. And one of the smaller high schools was 2,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is that, it goes to that like small and large, and in Vermont, these guys go to conferences and they talk about small schools, and they think they're talking about Chamberlain, but in reality, they're talking about, the third grade with 4 kids.
Right.
There's a graduating class in North Hero Elementary that has 1 kid.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So there's a multi-age classroom, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
And when we go to these meetings and we hear about issues, and the school committee has these issues on, internet connectivity. Really? That's their problem. I mean, on the computer, they're supposed to be doing standardized tests. So that's a huge issue. Totally nothing about anything we're doing. You know what I mean?
Different ballgame for sure.
So that's the kind of stuff. But I do think, I think there are pluses and minuses of any size school. And David's right. Right around the corner, Shelburne, K-8, they do really well. And so I think. I think we're most comfortable with what we have. And I think that's human nature. But we really appreciate hearing how much you love your school and what's important to you, because
although I did go to a huge high school. I mean, huge in Georgia.
What high school did you go to?
It was in Georgia, Chattahoochee High School. And I wish it was smaller. It was just way too big for me. Because I don't know half the people that were in my class. So I love the fact that, probably most of these kids grew up together, they know each other, and
I mean, I have
that's
a
pretty
bias in terms
awesome.
of high school size, you know what I mean? And it tends to be about the size of my school.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't want to get smaller.
Yeah.
If we just had SB kids, we would be about 20% smaller. We get 20% of our kids from outside of South Burlington. I work really hard to get those kids because I want to stay as big as we are. Mostly because that's how we fill all of our programs. If we had 750 kids, I have 185 freshmen next year from Tuttle. I have almost 50 freshmen from outside the district registered. That's our most stark contrast. But that's really exciting for us, because then when those freshmen are seniors, I can still offer 3 different AP sciences. I can still offer 27 varsity sports, and all those kinds of that broad programming that we need kids to run that broad program. 2 jazz bands. That's pretty hard to do if we just get a little bit smaller. And so, but then I also think sometimes, like, wow, if I had 1,200 kids, you know what I mean? Then there's other things, that I just do.
My nieces and my nephew, like, they have a hard time getting, in their school's a lot bigger in Connecticut, they have a hard time getting onto sports teams because it's so competitive.
It's very,
so it's kind of nice they can offer.
It's that balance.
It's hard.
I agree.
Because I hear them complaining about that, and I'm like, oh, at least, my kids, if they want to participate, they can probably get on.
I was
they might
talking
not be
to one of our
good.
graduating seniors the other day, and I was like, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And he's like, I want a school about the size of our high school. And I'm like, okay. He's like, and I found it. It's in Washington, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay. And then I picked my own son up from the airport, and he's at a school with 36,000. And he's like, it is awesome.
Right.
Like, there is so much you can do, And
they
so,
can offer more. For sure.
I think there are good and bad things. But anyway, I don't have a lot more to say. Do you guys want to add anything, or?
The only thing I would say, and it just goes back to the research bit, that the question that you asked, which I think is a really fair question, is like, what is it? And I think that we have to approach that question as the beginning of a discussion, as opposed to a debate. Because I think when people enter into that question, trying to win an argument, it's like you can find your research, other people could find theirs, and then it's just this who's going to win the debate, as opposed to a discussion about, look, there's positives and negatives to everything. We really we have a great system. We and change is really hard in a great system. What's in the balance? Let's have a thoughtful discussion, rather than, I've seen this situation, to be honest, kind of turn into more of a debate than a discussion, and it just feels kind of like there's going to be, I don't know, it feels divisive almost, and as somebody that gets all the kids, like, I don't know, I don't walk into a classroom and say, like, oh, that's a Central kid, or that's an Orchard kid. We don't know.
Right.
Although the kids know.
Yeah.
And that's not always good.
Yeah.
You know? And there's some.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
There's some thread that moves through their K-12 experience that
So do you, like, Orchard kids don't like other kids? I mean, or
They stick into the.
It's
or do they
what
stick
did you hear
together?
when you were picking schools in South Burlington?
Yeah.
Well, just that
Yeah.
Chamberlain was not as good.
Right,
Yeah.
so that's I would say that there's,
But with, and
sometimes it
I
does.
don't know how kids could miss that message.
And not
would
know how that's-
redistricting help?
Possibly, and I don't think that's the sole experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that happens. I think that happens.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things we're pretty sensitive to.
Yeah.
You know, and trying to fix that so that
Yeah.
all the kids, could they be one group? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And could they? That seems like it's better for so many reasons. You know, I don't know. Do you have a feeling about that, Brent?
You know, I think what we're trying to do as Holly, Mark, and myself is really work on those consistencies in curriculum and programming. So it doesn't matter if you go to Chamberlain or you go to Orchard or you go to Central. You're providing that similar experience that you can take to the middle school, high school, so you're as prepared as you can to be successful. In the struggle, and what's happening now, we're moving to South Burlington, and we're actually gonna live right in front of the cider mill. And Snyder Homes has a little.
Yeah.
So
Or are you, Sadie Lane?
Sadie Lane.
Oh, are you building right there right now?
There.
Is that your house they're
No,
building?
It's ours is the smaller one.
No, there's one house under construction on Sadie Lane right now.
Yep, that's not ours.
Okay,
Actually, the person
there's a foundation next to it that's being started.
That's mine.
Oh, congratulations, you're right in my line of view.
And pretty close to me too.
Yeah.
But it's okay, your roof line will not cross the tree level, so I can still see you.
But what's interesting is kids who live in the cider mill, they go to Orchard.
Right.
Kids on Dorset Street.
Oh, you go
right
to
in front of me,
Central.
Go to Central.
That's
and
right.
I'm not sure. So where the kids.
Sounds
say-
like it's time to redraw some
So figure
lines.
where they're going to go. Of course, my son's going to be a junior at
I
high
was here
school.
last time they redraw.
Yeah, we only have one high school. He'll be there.
It's
Yeah.
I got
all
one in
high
high school,
spit.
and the
It's
person
all
next
high
to us,
spit.
they don't have any kids in South Burlington, but where? So as
Maybe
these
they should go to
neighborhoods
Chamberlain.
come in, where are they going to?
So, and I'll tell you, I live sort of between Spear and Dorset, and there's two streets, and one goes
Vale
to
and Four Sisters, right?
One goes,
I've
yeah,
heard that,
one
yeah.
goes to Central and one goes to Orchard, and we don't know the people on
No,
Vale.
no, this came
I'm
up
not
at
kidding.
this came up at the
Like,
DRB.
Oh, you're on
This was an
Vale.
issue at the
You know,
DRB.
I'm on Four
Yeah.
Sisters, but
They don't like you.
I know.
These two streets, they have a beef with each other. It's very interesting,
It's so
and I couldn't
funny.
believe it when they said.
Not Julie.
Yeah.
No,
Those
she, no,
people.
I know. They said.
Yeah,
it's Four Sisters versus Vale. It's the weirdest
I
thing.
always wonder, so what would have happened
Yeah.
had all of our kids gone to one
the
school?
same
It would have been much more unifying, but this is, I'm not kidding, it's a very weird phenomenon. And it's not like we don't know any of them, and certainly, but our kids really, like, I say, like, oh, those kids, you know, the blah, blah, blah kids, and they're like, who? And that's very,
Yeah, yeah.
so,
yeah.
and we're right next to each other,
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
So redistricting, I think, is inevitable, and I'm hoping that they combine wherever they go, our neighborhood. Although we don't really have many kids anymore, they're all right. Yeah,
It's the funniest thing.
it is. It's a weird phenomenon. Yeah.
And I'm sure it's not unusual.
I'm
you
sure
know,
it's not
because
either.
lines have to be drawn.
Well,
you know, I mean,
you do your business based on your kids, right? So like,
Yeah.
your carpool is
Right,
the kids
right.
that are going to the same
yeah.
place.
And you think of neighborhoods as being neighborhoods, right?
Right.
That one got split.
It's
So
split.
one of those is not part of Pinnacle, essentially. You know, is
Yeah,
what happened.
That's
So,
right.
Very, very
So
interesting.
anyway, yeah.
I mean, I guess if the school board decides to go with something outside of 1 and 2,
Right.
I just want like clear, definitive reasons why.
I understand.
You know, and
Yeah.
and they have to be bigger than our class size are decreasing over 100 years or
Yeah.
10 years. You know.
Okay. Yeah.
To me, that's not. It just doesn't say enough to me.
Right. Okay. So I'm just, you know,
I don't know what would say.
right. What
but
would be compelling to you? I don't know if we could provide that for you, but I'm
I
just
don't know.
curious. Like,
I feel like financially it needs to make sense.
Right.
And that's a big component of it. And it just, none of these really financially make sense to me.
so if the finances look different and we could say, you know, it's going to be tax neutral to you, that would feel better?
It would feel better.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I still would not like, I mean,
Yeah,
to me, my
that's
kids
fair.
going to one elementary, I don't know if I will ever really like that idea.
Right.
I'll be honest. You
Right.
could-
Okay.
I could debate you all day on
Right.
that.
Would it have to be some improvements?
Absolutely.
I mean, not just tax neutral.
Right.
Yes.
Tax lowering.
Yeah, like blow me away. Like this is going to be
back up.
amazing for
Yeah.
your kid. You
Yeah.
know? You cannot find this anywhere else. This is going to be, your kid is going to be, you know.
There has to be some reason
Yeah.
to make you either pay more or be okay with paying
I need to be
less.
wowed.
Right.
And I
To
haven't
be wowed.
been.
Okay.
And
Yeah. Well, you have been because it's such a good school system.
well, that's the other side. You know, if
But
if
you-
the school sucked, then I-
okay, I
excuse me, but
understand.
No, you're
I
right.
would say,
Yeah,
please build a new school. Yes.
And then we're also going to transition to a new school. We don't know
Right.
any idea how it's going to run now because there's so many more students that we're like, how is this going to work out? Like, we don't know all the teachers. We've grown to know all the teachers from K to whatever.
Is Marquette your school?
Yeah.
I mean, Mark, he writes notes to my daughter on her report cards when she does well.
Yeah.
I don't. Would she get that if she was?
I
on
mean,
a
yeah,
huge
I
school?
think, first of all, I think that, I mean, I'm not advocating for anything, but I have to say that our teachers will be our teachers, and
Yeah.
I think they will be excellent no matter what building they're in.
But
Do you
would
know what
he,
I mean?
Like, would Mark, if there were that many kids in one school, could he know that that's my daughter? And you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like I remember she started. It was her and another girl, and they look a lot alike.
Yeah.
And so he used to like kind of joke with them about
Yeah.
which one are you?
Oh,
but I
yeah.
was amazed at that. Like 2 weeks into school, he knew who she was.
Right.
That was like, that was what sold me.
My son in kindergarten, Mrs. Miller, is super excited. She's like, I really want Jonathan.
Yeah.
Is that what we're going to have? And when there's such a big school, it's like the teachers all going to really know all this. So.
Right.
I know, I'm not. I mean, the teachers are great. I
Right.
don't think they're going to go downhill if you have a big school.
Right.
Don't get me wrong.
Right.
but
I
I like
understand.
the one-on-one personal attention.
Yeah, me too. I get that. Yeah. Okay. Well, first I want to thank Mr. Burke and Mr. Kuhn because this is Saturday morning and it's gorgeous outside, and they are two committed administrators. And
They brought their
thanks-
green up bags with them, I hope.
Yes, and we're going to go clean up some trash. And thanks for the council members as well. We really appreciate your participation and you guys taking time out as well. So,
No, I appreciate you guys coming in.
Eight of our students are from North
But that's
here
where you
on
vote
Isle
with
Mount.
your feet too. You know when you move there, right? And
right.
I mean, you have to keep that in mind, is that people don't do it, say, oh, there's no school here? I didn't know that, right? So you have to,
It's
yeah.
different tuitioning where you make that choice and your kid is a high flyer that wants to go to South Burlington because South Burlington has an excellent reputation. Theirs is having everybody from the entire town of Isle of Wight come to South
Right,
Burlington because that's
right.
a totally different business model because tuitioning is, as far as I know, there's a criteria for acceptance for tuition kids. You have to maintain a certain GPA, a certain behavioral standard, and if you just open the floodgates and say, nope, everybody from Isle of Wight automatically comes here, that's going to be a bigger burden for South Burlington financially because now you're going to have to deal with kids that do have behavioral issues, people that do have challenges, and that means more support staff, more services. So there's a different cost model involved in having everyone from a town come into our district versus having tuition people who actually go through the acceptance process.
Oh, there's an acceptance process?
No, I can.
Because public schools take everything.
Yeah, no,
I don't think so.
I think the
But Essex does. Essex has a perfect
Essex
acceptance
days.
process.
Oh, really?
I don't believe that we.
A public school? Really?
I don't
Honestly
believe-
speaking, I don't think that. I don't think that would be legal.
I
mean,
wouldn't either.
And
Or are there any hurdles that they need
Yeah,
to
so there's a
overcome?
couple things. So schools that don't have a high school, like our islands, they have open choice. And so they can choose this high school of their choice as long as they can get to them. In our case, we, as you know, send students, we send buses all the way up to Isle of Mont, and we have many students. We have about 160 students that join us in high school now. We have about 7 first in
yeah,
middle
currently
school
and 5 additional ones next year that are looking at.
So that's one avenue. The other part though is if you do have a high school and you want to exercise choice, there is a choice law that went into effect a couple of years ago that allowed you to go anywhere you wanted through a lottery process. resources under that particular law don't follow the student. It's looked upon as through the lottery process, and so we do have some students, but very small.
But you don't get their tuition dollars.
We don't. The resources don't follow. They stay within the receiving district. There's been some work we've had on that particular.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Although it's not her thing, but
There would be,
very
yes.
aware of that. Again, so that number, and for a long time prior to that law being enacted, we had an agreement. We had agreements with Essex, Colchester, Burlington, South Burlington, and CVU, where we allowed students to kind of go with an with an articulated amount of cost. But when that law changed, then those agreements essentially were just grandfathered. Now we don't have that.
So I guess Tom's question or statement was, for those 160 students, are there any hurdles, like a student with some kind of special need, or a student with no hurdles?
And that's very important. It's very important that if this is the case, we would not discriminate based on any student. We would accept them if they would want to come to us.
And tuition would be the same, well, I guess nowadays.
Well, there's announced tuition. There's a formula that goes through an announced tuition. It's somewhere around $15,000 per student. So you can do some simple math. When 160 students come down to South Burlington, that's revenue. Obviously, the most important thing is we have a much more diverse, welcoming group of students. And I think most of our high school students would say, I have no idea we're all South Burlington. We're all kids within the schools.
Yep.
But so we work really hard to make sure they're included, to the point where we have busing, as I said earlier. We have afternoon busing that goes at the end of the day at 6 o'clock to take them back up so they can participate in the Scholars Bowl and the spelling and the extracurricular activities. So, and we have a Wi-Fi on that bus so they can also do work. So that's been.
Can I mention something also? Because Tom, I think your question about how if kids have to travel throughout the district is a good question. So I want to make sure we capture that at some point, like going across South Burlington. And there's two differences here also, and I'm glad what you're saying for this. Like students that come from Georgia or the islands, right? Those students, when they don't have a high school, we get that tuition dollars for those students, and we take care. We cannot discriminate against any child, right? Now the whole islands thing is a little bit different. I mean, like Isle of Mont, that piece is part of Act 46, in which small school districts in the future need to start looking at unification with other districts. And at some point, there'll be a penalty down the road. We are a preferred district because of our size and our governance situation. That part doesn't really affect us, but it could benefit. It could be a mutual benefit if we do a side-by-side kind of governance structure with the islands. And so we just have to tease those apart, because I think we're getting, as we've been talking, we're getting discussed about what's Act 46 doing, things like that. So
I know it's very early in the process. So
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get my head around it and understand more about it.
Just know, even right now, we're not being selective. For example, students that come from Alamat or North Hero, if they have special needs, for example, we accept them. We're not selective at all. We actually will have somebody with special needs next year.
Okay.
Yeah. So no, that would
So
be.
there's no additional cost charged or no
There is
additional
not.
fees?
I don't even know if that would be legal to be
Well,
selective. You know.
The sending school is the legal entity for
Yeah.
the student. They have some, obligation to ensure that their students are being provided the right education, so they're the LEA.
Okay.
We have an obligation to provide and appropriately staff, and that's really our obligation. And so, and we really have, for many, many years, we've had students coming down. I do think that there's some recent challenge in the market in that, right, and the school board's currently just receiving information as recent as our last meeting, this past Wednesday, around the Grand Isle Supervisory Union wanting to do a merger study with us. So we're looking at the numbers of students that would come down into some different configurations. Could we welcome them into our current configuration, or how will that also enter into future ideas? Because, as Mark said, their total numbers are below 900, and they're being asked to look at a more efficient way of providing educational services.
And, go ahead, sir.
Governance.
So the merger study was about merging the two districts into one,
Yeah, so
or
they've
having this
approached
district
us,
absorb
they've
the
approached
entire
us,
population of high
and then
school.
they probably will be approaching Colchester or Essex or others around this because they have their communities are smaller and shrinking numbers of enrollment.
Sure.
So they're doing this study. We're one of which they're looking at, and they met with a couple board members and myself, and now the rest of the board is going to get some additional information from me on numbers and whether or not we could. I honestly haven't done that yet. So
Would say it went through and was accomplished, would then their voters be voting about our schools? Would they send a couple members to the school board?
that's right. So the configuration of, and then we're getting out ahead of this, but the board membership would change. It would take, in order to pass it, every community would have to have a positive vote,
Oh,
including
interesting.
us. So that, there's a fair amount of hurdles. But again, we're looking at Vermont children too across all of Vermont. Yeah.
Would they keep all of their schools open in the
No,
islands? or
they probably
close
wouldn't.
some?
Again, I'm not
That'll be a
that
long
well
ways
versed
down,
there.
yeah.
There's some that would stay open, some that would merge in. Many schools, we think about, often what's being talked about now is like school closure. There's a lot of communities that are repurposing their facilities.
Right.
Repurposing to welcome our seniors and recreation and after-school programming, so that they're not like.
Community center.
That's
instead of
right.
maybe in a
Because there's a lot of people thinking, well, this school's going to shut down, it's just going to be vacant, or, and it's going to be vandalized, and, there's more thought going on.
Can I just say real quickly, that I think the beauty of Act 46 is to start with the school boards. I think there's 5 different school boards, plus the supervisory school board in the islands, right? And so no one's going to make a decision on closing a school unless they can get their governance model together. We have 5 schools, but we have 1 school board to look over all of it. Sorry, I had to throw that in there.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's multiple towns in the islands, right? It's
Right.
Lamont.
Each town has their own board.
Grand Isle.
Alburn, too.
And Alburn is considered
By
part of
Lamont,
Islands.
Alburn, North Hero, South Hero, Grand Isle, South Hero.
And our 160 students, there are 160 students that we get?
160 students.
That we get
Not all from the
from the
islands.
islands?
We also have Georgia, which is on the other side.
And how many from each?
Well, about 60, 70, and then, so it's like 70, 80, something like that.
From the
70
islands?
From Georgia, and the remainder
90 from the
Yeah.
islands? And so if we were not to accept their K through 4 or K through 5 students, would that mean also the middle school and high school students wouldn't come here as well? So is that also
Probably.
having?
But not for Georgia, though. Georgia's a different district, though.
Yeah.
That's part of Franklin.
Right, just for
West.
the just for
That's
the
a-
islands, just for those 90
Right.
students.
And again, I think, there's some level of,
But
the board, and I recognize there's volatility in this,
Yes.
right? Because we don't know. It's open choice for moms and dads and guardians to say, hey, my child would like to go to Essex. My next child would like to go to South Burlington, perhaps. So there's some level of volatility. Although it's done well, our high school and our middle school are very desirable.
But if we merge, there wouldn't be that.
But there wouldn't be, and that would lower the risk, although it would also change some other things for us, and we'd have to kind of right-size it.
And how many additional students from
Well,
the
again, that's what
islands?
I need to, I'm
You
right
don't
on
have
the-
those numbers, okay.
I'm needing to do the numbers right now.
Yeah.
Be ready to share back. Come on the 18th.
I am.
So you want to know what number for who?
For the islands, the K through 12 student population.
And so that's part of their study work with us.
Too much work these days on
And I can come on the 18th.
I'm just conscious of everyone's time because we had scheduled to go to 11. And I feel like I've seen all of your faces at other meetings. I don't know, did you go to the pre-22 meeting?
I was not.
You were not. So you're probably the only person who has not filled out a feedback form. I know I have feedback forms from all of you.
I'm looking at Grand Isle.
I found it at home.
Oh, okay, so that's great. So we'll leave a little bit of time. At the end.
603.
Does anyone have any final comment or thoughts before we?
Yeah.
Can I ask one of these?
Yeah, sure.